ahead and, first of all, I'm Rabbi Bruce Rachlin. Good to see all of you. Our goal tonight is to together explore some of the subtleties of Chumash, and specifically as they regard choosing a mate and maintaining a marriage. The two most operative words there are subtleties and together. So please don't only feel free to participate, but it will be helpful if you participate. So let's begin. Vayomer Hashem Elokim, and God said, Lo tov hayot ha'adam levado. It's not good for man to be alone. Es elo ezer kenegdo. I'm going to make him an ezer kenegdo, a help against him. Whatever that may mean, and we'll see if we can't elucidate it as we go along. Now, if you take a look at this pasuk, there's something which doesn't seem absolutely necessary. As we'd say in learning, it's meyutar. It's extra. It doesn't really have to be there. So I ask you, in this pasuk, what really doesn't have to be here? No, kenegdo is, as we'll see, a crucial part of the phrase ezer kenegdo. So let me suggest that what really doesn't have to be here is Lo tov hayot adam levado. It's not good for man to be alone. Kadosh Baruch Hu could simply have said, Es elo ezer kenegdo. I'll make a helpmate for man. Doesn't really have to elucidate why he wants to do that. And we certainly know he doesn't always elucidate why he wants to do a particular thing. It's almost as if the pasuk was concerned for what? That we might think what? That it's good to be alone. It's almost as if the pasuk is suggesting we might think it would be good for man to be alone. So, how can that be? How can it be that the pasuk had a concern that we might think it was good for man to be alone? Why? I mean, why would it be good for man to be alone? Okay, Adam Ha Rishon was created singly. Good. What else? What other reasons might we have for thinking it would be good for man to be alone? I'll mention to you, while you're thinking about that the Ramban here, he quotes in this context famous medrash, Du Partsufim Yivro, that man was created two-faced. Has this slightly different nuance in English than it does in Hebrew. That man was created two-sided. He was created as a sexually and psychologically self-contained creature. So I say to you again, why might we have thought that it was good for man to be alone? That he would be independent. He wouldn't have to rely on others. Good. What else?
He wouldn't be responsible for anyone except for himself.
He might not be responsible for anyone except for himself. What else? Yeah, it's easier in a certain way just to be self-contained, right? And he would possess perhaps a sense of wholeness, right? Which otherwise, apparently, he does not. And he would be free of comparison and free of competition, perhaps. and free of the drive to have to prove oneself and to possess and to overcome others. And therefore, I think that you've mentioned some very good reasons. And therefore, we're sort of driven to the question to ask, why does God conclude that it's lo tov, that it's not good for man to be alone? Certainly in the face of all of these reasons that have been enumerated here, we can see why we might think very well that it is good for man to be alone. So why does God conclude that it's not good? Take a look at Rashi. We'll see Rashi has one suggestion. I'm trying to find it. Oh, good. Pasuk 18, right below the line, Pasuk 18. Lo tov hayot, it's not good for man. Shelo yomru, so that he would not say, shtei reshuyotein, that there are two authorities in the world. HaKadosh Baruch Hu be'elyonim, God above, ve'ein lo zug, and he has no partner, and man in the earthly realm have no partners. That Rashi suggests man might start to think that. What's really if we want to understand that, why man might think that it's good, to be alone, why he might get this sense of superiority, we just have to think for a moment about our own government and the effect of isolation on the sense of power. Why is it so often we're seeing politicians who go astray, is the only way to put it, who go astray and do the most terrible things with their power, or use it for their own benefit. We have, unfortunately, examples on top of examples here and wherever others may have come from. So Rashi seems to suggest that isolation by man being alone would create a sense of power and a sense of what's the word I'm looking for here? A sense of unaccountability. Thank you. A sense of unaccountability that we know leads to terrible results. Okay, so that's why Rashi thinks it's not good for man to be alone. What other reason might we suggest that it's not good for man to be alone? Even though we've developed all the reasons why it might be good for man to be alone. Pardon? Right, that's true. But remember, in the context of the Ramban, man was created sexually whole. He presumably could reproduce himself if he wanted to. Now, I'm not suggesting that that is to be taken literally. But why might we think that it's not good for man to be alone?
But before the Chet, there was no need to reproduce because man was supposed to live forever.
That's possibly so, but I think that al derech hapshat, we just want to go straight. That we need to ask, why isn't it good? And we have one suggestion, because of the sense of power that it would give Adam in the world. But also, we said before that, man wouldn't have to struggle, man wouldn't have to face comparison, he wouldn't have to, you know what? Perhaps man needs the anxiety of struggle. And that's one reason why it's not good for him to be alone. And perhaps man needs to strive to reach beyond himself. And that's not why it's good for him to be alone and self-contained. Okay. In any event, God has a solution for this problem of it's not being good for man to be alone, and that's what, according to the Pasuk 18, what's God's solution to it's not being good for man to be alone? That's right. I'm going to create for him an Ezer Kenegdo, a help against him, whatever that may mean. We're not going to explore that at the moment, but I think before we're finished, it will come clear to us what perhaps that means. Okay. So let's move on now to see how Kadosh Baruch Hu intends to advance this solution of Lo Tov Adam Levado. It's not good for man to be alone. How does God advance it? So let's take a look at verses 19 and 20 here. Okay. Vayitzer Hashem Elokim min ha'adamah, and God created from the ground kol chayat hasadeh, every beast of the field, v'et kol of hashamayim, and every fowl of the heaven, vayaveh, and he brought them el ha'adam, to man, lirot ma yikra lo, to see what he would call them, what he would name them. V'kol asher yikra lo ha'adam, and whatever man called the living creatures, hu shemo, that was its name. Vayikra Adam Shemo l'kol habehema, and man called names to all of the animals and to the birds of the heaven, u'l'kol chayat hasadeh, and to every beast of the field, ula Adam lo matza ezer kenegdo. And man did not find for himself a mate. Now there's a very striking notion here. That what?
He can find his wife in animals.
Yes, right. The pasuk seems to suggest that the purpose of Adam naming the animals was to somehow help him find a mate among them. And by the way, the Ramban and others say, you know what? Had he actually found someone with whom he was compatible there, that's what it would have been. But of course, Ula Adam Lo Matza Ezer Kenegdo. He didn't find a name for himself. But that may not be the only, the pardon?
Who didn't find Ezer Kenegdo? God or man?
Man didn't find.
Okay.
Man did not find for himself. Okay? So let's ask ourselves again. What's the purpose, according to these psukim, of bringing the animals before Adam? Several reasons now. What was reason number one? Why? To name it. Number one is to name it. And number two?
Showing that he's different.
Oh, okay, we're going to get there, right? That somehow he doesn't find a mate among the animals. But if we take a look at Rashi, at the bottom of page 1, on the left-hand bottom 2 lines of page 1, Rashi says as follows: Va'od limadecha kan, and further it teaches you here, shebeshat yitziratam, that at the moment of their creation, the animals' creation, Miyad, bo b'yom, immediately, in that very day that God created the animals, Hevium el ha'adam likrot lehem shem, He brought them to Adam to call them names. Ubedivrei agadah, let's focus in on these next few words. Ubedivrei agadah, in the words of the Agadah, of the Midrash, Yetzira zo lashon ridui v'kibush, that Yetzira, that we find in our pasuk, that God created the animals, right, and brought them to man, this is a language which implies ridui v'kibush, subjugation and dominion. As the pasuk says, and Rashi brings another pasuk here, Ki tatsur el ir, when you shall siege a city, you'll attack a city, Shivashan takat yado shel Adam, that he subjugated them under the hand or the power of Adam Ha Rishon.
Did you name the animals through Ruach HaKodesh, or?
That's a wonderful question. We don't know exactly how he did it, although many of the Meforshim say that he had an intuition, that God had built into Adam Ha Rishon an intuition as to what would be a proper designation for each of the animals. But we don't really know. Okay. Now, there's a strange idea here that somehow naming the animals was a form of subjugating them. How in the world is naming someone an act of subjugating them? Am I subjugating my children when I give them a name? Yeah, oh, how, why? How?
Well, especially in Jewish tradition, when you name after somebody else, sometimes you want to endow your child with the qualities of that person.
Of that person.
You go to a bris, and that's what the Bartor is. Why do we pick this name? Or if it's not after somebody, it's after, the Tanakh, you pick it for a certain reason, or it's from the Parsha.
Okay.
So you are, if it's, I mean, subjugation is a pretty strong word.
Subject is
but-
pretty strong. Yeah.
But, naming the animals, he was like defining them.
Oh, somehow he was defining them. Somehow he was defining
The
them.
way they're going to define
Oh,
themselves.
and let's put it into context of our lives. When you go to the doctor and he labels you a patient, is he taking some control of your life? He certainly is, isn't he? When a teacher labels a child a slow learner, is he taking control of that child's life? You better believe that he is. And the most obvious example in all of our lives is, if we take a job and we have a boss, and I'm the boss's employee, has he taken control of my life to some real measure?
So it's establishing the authority over.
Right. So naming someone is very often an establishing of my authority over that individual. And in that moment, I take control to some degree away from the individual and become the person in control. Now, what is Adam intended to learn from this process of subjugation? Because the pasuk, we read 2 pasukim at the end of pasuk Chaf 20, it says, Ula Adam lo matza ezer kenegdo. He named all of these animals, but he didn't find a mate for himself. So what are we intended to learn from this process of subjugation as regards choosing a mate for oneself?
You can
he cannot name his wife.
Oh,
Because he cannot have the division
okay,
somewhere.
fair enough.
That's-
And what else might we think? How could we expand that idea a moment? How could we expand that idea a moment?
He's like a lost sheep. He's got nobody to control. No one that he can.
He doesn't have anyone to control, and therefore what? What are we meant to learn here from his inability to find someone to control, to be a mate for him?
There is a need for it.
I would put it a slightly different way, but I think it's what you're suggesting, which is a relationship in which one partner dominates the other is lo tov, is not good for man. Adam goes through the entire process of naming the animals. He does not, which is a process, according to Rashi, of subjugating them under his control. And the Pasuk says, and he didn't find a mate for himself. In other words, something which I can subjugate is not a proper mate for myself. There has to be a certain parity in the relationship. And minus that parity, minus that equality, it's not good. It's not good for the relationship. Okay, go ahead.
Because it's one of the curses that one woman is subjugated by the man.
Not in the beginning. That was not intended. It was only after the incident with the Nachash, with the snake, that Hadosh Baruch Hu suggested that at least in certain realms, defined realms, that she would perhaps be subject to her husband. It's a great question. But it's those defined realms that draws the difference. Originally, it was not meant to be that Chava would be subjugated to Adam, and perhaps not in any sense.
So what's the thought?
Pardon?
Are you going to get to that part? About where it says that she's, you know.
Yes, we're going to get to that.
Rule, I can't remember.
We're going to get to the part that relates to that. Okay? Good.
Well, let's get to the part.
Okay. Now,
You know, I'm
Here we
sure
go.
there are different interpretations of that.
okay. Now, if we take, though, I would like us to take a moment here and take a look once again at Pasuk Yud Tet, the 19th verse. And I want to suggest to you that in that verse, if you look carefully, there's something which is missaid. Let me put it that way. It's missaid. It doesn't really belong there, or at least it shouldn't be put in that way. And what is that? What in that pasuk? This seems to be wrong. I'll give you one hint. We use this expression so often ourselves in daily life that it doesn't sound wrong to us anymore, but it is wrong.
You mean the word to see is supposed to understand?
Good. In other words, if Pasuk says that God came to see what Adam would name the animals, right? You don't come to see what Adam would name the animals. You come to hear what Adam would name the animals. So let me ask you this. What is God coming to see in this naming process? What is it that he wants to view in this process of Adam naming the animals?
All the animals react, you know.
how the animals react to the name. That's an interesting thought. I must admit, I hadn't thought of it in that way before. Maybe, what else? But you have a great idea, flip it.
Or how Adam's not animal.
To see how Adam not sees the animals, reacts to the animals. And why does God want to see the visceral reaction of Adam to the animals? Let's take a look at Rashi again. Dibra hamato ula Adam lo matza ezer kenegdo, which you will find on page, actually it's page 2, or 25, it names itself. Ula Adam lo matza ezer kenegdo, right? Kishahevion, when God brought them the animals, Hevion lefanav kol min vamin. He brought them in front of him every species. Zachar v'nekeva, male and female. Omar, he, Adam, said, when he was doing this, L'kulam yesh ben zug. To each of them, there's a mate. V'li ein ben zug. And I have no mate. Miyad, immediately, Vayatel, God put him to sleep and created Chava. So what is it that God really wants to see in this process as regards Adam's reaction?
Adam should come to his own conclusion.
We'll come to that. That's one correct answer. To come to his own conclusion. What other answer may be?
To see if he feels that there's something missing.
There's something missing.
To see if Adam realizes that there's something missing in his life.
Oh, he wants Adam to realize it. He wants him to realize it on his own. So let's see what it is let's actually look at the process now ourselves and see exactly what may have happened there. Each species, male and female, is brought before Adam. As they pass, a certain realization grows in Adam's mind, you might say in his soul. And what is that realization, according to Rashi?
But there are two of each, but he's only one.
Oh, in other words, that he is alone. He's alone. I am, of all the creatures, am alone. And if we take a look now at the Ramban on page 5, it's both in the Hebrew and the English. I'm going to read the English for everyone. In my opinion, the Ramban says, it is correct to say that it was his, Kodesh Baruch Hu's will, blessed be he, not to take Adam's rib from him to make him a wife until he himself, Adam himself, would know that among the created beings there is no help suitable for him, until he would crave to have a help suitable like him. What is the Ramban saying? He's saying something very profound here. What is he saying? Yes, I want to draw that a little further. Can you draw it a little further for us?
You first need to realize that you're missing something to be able to request.
Good. In other words, you first have to realize that you lack it, that you need it, right? To put it on that. You first have to realize that you need it. And so, this really brings us to the second criteria in choosing a mate, right? It is someone who you need and at the same time, that person has to fulfill your need. It's not good enough just to need the person. We all know, unfortunately, that very often you can fall in love with someone who doesn't reciprocate. But the person has to create that need within you, and they have to satisfy the need as well. What happened to Adam in that situation was that as he saw all of them coming before him, he became progressively anxious. I'm alone. I'm alone. And I'm lonely because I'm alone. And I need someone. But these don't fulfill my needs for me.
Isn't it also that if he was maybe given Chava right away, maybe he wouldn't have appreciated that.
Exactly.
He didn't feel that he was lacking.
Exactly. I think you are 1,000% correct. Kadosh Baruch Hu did it this way because he wouldn't have appreciated her if she was just brought to him and handed to him on a silver platter, so to speak. He had to realize that he had a need and that someone had to fulfill that need.
But that is a differentiation between man and animals. The man has a kind of acknowledgement of lack, of want something, and that's why maybe one, I don't know, the reasons why in the first place God didn't create man, Adam, as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, maybe he said it's not told, because for every creation of God, he said it's God, it's told.
Right.
And suddenly it's not told.
Right, good, excellent. That's wonderful.
Maybe.
Right, good. So let me ask you, if Adam doesn't find someone who, calls out to him, to his need, and certainly not someone who satisfies his need, why is that? Why is it that after all, Adam didn't find a mate there? As I mentioned to you, the Ramban at least says that had he found a mate, perhaps a giraffe or, unicorn, I don't know. Had he found someone whom he liked, God, they would have mated. We would be a very different species than we are now. So what is it about them that doesn't work for him?
Because any female had a male anyway. He's a own.
Right. Well, let's say he would find one of the females. It would be a problem for the male of that species, but for himself, it'd be, So what is it? Why doesn't it work for him?
Well, it couldn't be an Azer connected.
Can't be an Azer connected, but why can't they be an Azer connected?
Because it couldn't challenge me.
Oh, because they're too alien, right? That they're too unreachable for him. He can't identify or relate to them. That's why it doesn't work for him. And so now we come to our third criteria. Not only must there be parity in the relationship, not only must that person create and fulfill a need that I have, but there has to be identity and relationship. I have to, on many levels, identify myself with this other creature. And I must relate to that person for reasons which we'll get to shortly. Okay. Now, I want to ask you something. we've gone through these psukim. I think we've looked at them pretty carefully and identified a number of problems and subtleties in the pasuk. But you know what? If it had been us, we could have done it so much easier than God did it. You know, why did he go through this whole rigmarole, this whole process? All he had to do was what? Yeah, he only had to tell Adam what? Lo tov hayot adam levado. It's not good for you to be alone, Adam. Take my word for it. You know, I can see a little further than you. It's just not good for you to be alone. Believe me. Yeah? So why? Because since there's such a obviously simpler method of doing this, why does God go through this whole complicated process that we've witnessed here?
Because he didn't have any contemporaries. There was no one, like people today, when they grow up in society, they see that men and women get together, they marry, they have families. He had no one to show him the way.
Okay, good. What else might we think?
There is also a similar analogous relationship between Adam and God. A certain parity. They have to understand each other.
Okay. What else might we suggest? Good. I think it's a very simple thing that in some ways we've forgotten today, which is one cannot mandate the complex desire to give myself over to another, which is called love. You can't command love. Even God couldn't command love. And therefore, Kadosh Baruch Hu goes through this complex process so that Adam on his own can come to the conclusion that he needs someone and that he has to have relationship with that person and that there must be some parity in that relationship between himself and his mate. Pardon? That's right. And that's why, and it's a wonderful question, and without going off track here too much, that's why many of the Meforshim struggle exactly with what do we mean by loving God? Is it some sort of complex emotional connection that I meant to have with God? Or is it some sort of intellectual connection or realization I'm meant to have with or about God? So we see that Meforshim struggle exactly with that question. How can you command love? And many of them say, you can't command love. So how does God command love? So that becomes a whole complex discussion in and of itself. Okay. So now we said there are three criteria in essence for choosing a mate. It should be someone whom it can not be someone whom I can subjugate. There must be parity, equality of some sort in the relationship. The relationship must generate and fulfill a sense of need within me, and obviously a sense of need in the other person as well. It has to be mutual. And there has to be identity and relationship between the two people. That's it. I'm not driving us too far into that because it's very important to understand what identity and relationship mean, but it will take us a little more time than we have this evening to try and define what that might mean. Okay, so now what happens? So now now Adam has finally come to the place where he realizes that he needs someone else. And Kadosh Baruch Hu does what? What does God do for him? Pardon? Well, before that, puts him to sleep, right? Let's go back to that pasuk, and I have to find it. Someone help me. 21. Okay. So, Vayapkal Hashem Elokim Tardema al Ha'adam, and God caused to fall upon Adam. This translation says a deep sleep. I would use a slightly fancier word because I think the nuance conveys a profound sleep. God caused him to fall into a profound sleep, al hadam, on the man, and he slept. Vayikach achat meitzalotov, and he took one of his, this is translated ribs, perhaps more literally translated sides. He took one of his sides. Now, this is the notion, this is partially where the Ramban gets that notion, right, that man was created, du partsufim, two-sided or two-faced, he was two holes. And he took one of his sides, and he closed up the place with Rav Yizgar Basar Taptena. He closed up the place with the flesh, and then Vayivan Hashem Elokim, God built Et Hatzela, the side Asher Lakach Min Adam, the side which he had taken from the man, Leisha, to a woman, Vayiviecha El Ha'adam. Now, this is the part in which we have the comedic break. If you take a look at those two psukim, 21 and 22, what does that process sound like to you in modern terms? Surgery, the first surgery, right? It's the first surgery, and the tardema, this deep sleep, the first anesthetic of some sort. It's almost like a trance-like or coma-like state. And the whole operation itself sounds like what sort of a process or procedure in modern terms? Not so much a transplant as a
Separation, Siamese twins. No?
yeah, cloning. Yeah, I that's possible. What you're saying, Aaron, is possible as well. So it's some sort of genetic manipulation, right? It's some sort of genetic manipulation. I don't mean that seriously, but to the modern ear, you might hear some of those nuances there. Okay. And now we come to a very, very important pasuk, 23. Let's look at it together. It's on page 3 or 26 in there. Vayomer ha'adam, and the man said, Zot hapam, this time, etzem me'atzamai, it is bone of my bone, and basar mi basari, and flesh of my flesh. Lezot yikarei isha, this one will be called woman, ki meish lukacha zot, because from man was this one taken. What is this pasuk describing on the part of Adam? What is this pasuk describing on the part of Adam?
Is that naming or something about subjugating and giving name?
Right. I'm going to give you the short answer. The short answer is that I think that it was so apparent to him that this creature was totally different from the other creatures he had done before him, that he did not even think in terms of subjugating. It wasn't a category that came to mind because he had a need, and this creature both generated that need, and he saw that she could fulfill the need. In fact, if you want to go even further in this, I had intended to learn this Rashi with you. Take a look at the Rashi on the same page at the bottom, left-hand column, towards the bottom, it's, where it's underlined, Zotapam. This is now, Zotapam, this time, the pasuk says, Malame, this teaches, Rashi says, Sheba Adam al kol behema v'chaya, that Adam Ha Rishon had relations with every behema and beast, v'lo nitkara dato, and his mind was not cooled, his anxiety was not overcome bahem, through them. So, Rashi. But I think what Rashi is pointing out too is that this is such an obviously different context for Adam, that his reaction to Chava doesn't allow for that thought to enter his mind.
Also, he's not saying anything except what's so. I mean, he's not defining the woman beyond the
Right.
fact.
Well, we're going to see what he's doing here. So hang on to that thought.
Yeah.
We're going to see what he's doing here. So let me ask you, this pasuk 23, what does it speak to? What is it telling us? Just put more simply, what is this pasuk telling us? Yeah, but overall, what is it telling us? Yeah, that's a point. What else is it telling us? Overall, what is the pasuk as a whole talking about? He's happy, right? It's talking about his what to Chava? Not interaction, but his reactions to Chava, right? It's talking about his reactions to Chava. Number one. Number two, there's a certain word in the pasuk which is repeated over and over, which is always a clue to us that it is a very important word in the context of a verse. And what word is that in this verse? Well, what word is repeated over and over again?
Zot.
Zot. This. Right? So what I want to do is take each instance of this, and try and figure out what that particular zot, what sort of reaction it is expressing on part of Adam. Okay, so let's begin with what I think is the simple one, the first one. Rashi, he wakes up, there's Chava, and he says, Zotapam, this time, Etzemei atzamai ubasar mi basari, it's bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. What sort of a reaction is that? Pardon? Yeah, or in the broader term we call excited and all other sorts of reactions like that. What kind of reactions? Pardon? Yeah, they're positive. But I'm not looking for anything deeper. They're emotional reactions, right? This is an emotional reaction. His first reaction to Chava is an emotional reaction. Basar mi etzemi atzamai, basar mi basari, it's bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. He intuits in a second that this is the person he needs. Okay, let's go to the second one. He says, L'zot yikarei isha. To this one shall be called woman. What sort of reaction is that? We might read further a little bit. I'll read a little bit further. Ki meish lu kacha zot, because from man was this one taken. What sort of a reaction is that?
Intellectual.
It's an intellectual reaction, right? He's evaluating where she's come from, etc. He says, this is how one must define her. It's a intellectual reaction. So far, he has an emotional reaction, and then he has an intellectual reaction. And now comes the hard part. And it says, Ki meish lukacha zot, because this one was taken from man. So if it's not emotional and it's not intellectual, what is it? What sort of reaction is it? Hmm?
Physical?
Pardon?
Physical?
It doesn't sound physical to me. Well, let me ask you something. When you point to something, and you say about it, or someone say this, what are you doing? When I point to you and I say this, excuse me for doing that.
Not polite.
Well, it's not polite, right? It's what we call an objectifying statement or reaction. I turn that person, let's say in this case, into an object. I'm objectifying that thing. Now, is objectifying someone good? Not usually, but what about here? Is it good here, perhaps?
Well, he doesn't know her.
He doesn't know her, okay. But he recognizes what about her? In the strangest way, he recognizes what about her?
Part of him.
Pardon? No, not that she's a part of him.
She's like me.
Not that she's like him. That she's separate from him. In the most strange way, he recognizes that she is a person in and of herself, even though she may have come from him. And this is what kind of a reaction? It's not an emotional reaction. It's not an intellectual reaction. It's a moral reaction to her. It's an ethical reaction to her. He acknowledges that she is a creature, although taken from him, she is a creature who is her own being. Now I want to ask ourselves this question. Let me make a statement. I think here what the Chumash has done in this pasuk is to spell out for us the three aspects of a marriage relationship without which it doesn't work. There has to be emotional interaction. There has to be intellectual reaction. I have to try and understand the other person. I have to try and know who and what he or she is. And then I also have to acknowledge that this person is a creature in and to herself, for all the fact that somehow she's related to me. I want to ask you a question. We live in an age where the divorce rates are horrible, terrible. Half in the United States, half of all marriages are doomed to divorce. Fortunately here, it's not that great, and we can only pray it doesn't ever become that great. But let me ask you this. If you had to choose one of these three modes of a marriage: emotional, intellectual, and moral or ethical. Over which one does most marriages break down?
The first two.
Emotional?
Moral.
I think it's the moral. If you fail to respect the person as an individual within, let me use a female, just in terms of my speaking of it, as a person within herself who has certain rights, therefore, who has the right to make certain demands upon me, who has the right to ask me to recognize her as not simply an extension of myself. That's where, in my experience, it breaks down. Over and over. And then, when that breaks down, the emotions turn cold. The emotions turn cold in the relationship, and all understanding seems to flee out the door. Okay. So now we have three criteria for choosing a mate, and three modes of relationship which one has to maintain if the relationship is going to work over time. And now let's come to the very last pasuk that we're going to discuss tonight. Pasuk Chaf Dalet, 24, on page 4. Okay. The pasuk says, Al Kain, therefore, Yazov ish et aviv et imo, therefore a man should leave his father and mother, v'davad ba'ishto, and cling to his wife, v'hayu lebasar echad, and they should become one flesh. The word al kain, therefore, implies what? A conclusion based on what came before. So my question is, given what's come before from Pasuk 18 to here, what is the al kain, the therefore, relating back to? Oh, so I think one very powerful answer is, because it's not good for man to be alone, therefore he has to do A and B and C. Good. What else?
He's with his father, he's not alone either.
Well, we're going to talk about that in a moment. We'll see whether he is or not. What the other real possibility is, for all the things we've discussed until now in this lesson, therefore man must leave his father and his mother. Now, I want to ask you, what is meant by leave? A man must leave, or wife must leave her mother and her father. Does that mean I can't live with my parents? Does it mean I can't visit my parents? What does it mean? Pardon? Okay, change in authority. Good. Be independent. Right. I think if you put these two together, what you come out with is very simple. That what Yazov means, I have to leave my father and my mother, means that I have to alter the balance, the valence of my relationships, right? Whereas previously, the most profound influence upon me is probably what? Whom? The parents, particularly in the early years, even though we don't seem to realize how that carries through the rest of our life sometimes. Um, nonetheless, I have to now make this relationship with my mate the primary relationship in my life. You know why it is that a person actually shouldn't or can't live forever in their parents' home? What's the answer to that? The very simple answer, what is it? Hmm? Yeah. Another, or to put it another way, you can't be a child all your life, right? You can't be a child all your life. Okay, a new self has to come into being, right? A new self has to come into being, and okay. Now, after one has altered this balance in one's relationship so that the married relationship becomes the primary relationship in one's life, the pasuk says he has to v'davak be'ishto. He has to cleave or cling to his wife or her husband. But what does davak mean? What does it mean cling here? Now, davak we have glue, So what does it mean he has to glue himself to his wife or cling to his wife?
Put her as a priority.
Pardon?
Put her as a priority.
Put her as a priority. And what else? Put her as a priority.
Not put anywhere else.
Pardon? That's what?
And not what's in the way.
That's right. And not.
Major decision.
Right,
That's it.
exactly.
That's it.
You have to stick by it, right? And what else?
You have to know what you need to know about her in order to do what she needs.
I think you just said something very profound. I'm going to try and put it slightly simpler. You put it in a very nuanced way, which is that I have to extend the sources of my embarrassment and joy in broader terms. I have to make that person's concerns my concerns. I can't just go my merry way, not wondering what I'm going to do is going to affect my husband or my wife. I have to open myself up and take that person into my being. Because every partner has to feel the support of the other. And it's only when each partner feels the support of the other that the security is achieved, which breeds growth. Simple as that. You have to feel secure in the relationship if the relationship is going to grow.
What do you mean by growth?
Well, we're going to come to that in 1 second. Okay. And we're going to come to it in this context. And the pasuk concludes by says, "V'hayu lebasar echad," and they should become one flesh. What does it mean? They should become one flesh. Rashi, take a look at Rashi. Rashi is very, he's always shot oriented. He says, lebasar echad, it's on page 4, right-hand column, underlined, lebasar echad. Havlad notzar al yedei shnehem, the child is formed by both man and woman, v'sham na'aseh b'saram echad. And it's there that their flesh is made one. So somehow Rashi sees this outside of their relationship in a certain way. It's only in the child that they're made one. But if we take a look, if we turn over to page 6, the last page, we'll see that the Sforno had a very different and profound understanding of this. He says, V'hayu basar echad, and they shall become one flesh. In all their actions, they will aim to attain the perfection intended by man's creation, as though the two were as only one. What is he saying, Sforno? They should be for one flesh means what?
As we were saying before, that the separation between what's the well-being of one and well-being of the other.
Right. And also that they should come to have a common vision. They should come to have a common vision which, as a family, they're pursuing. Doesn't mean that they can't, pursue different parts of it or, work different ways, but overall, they have to have a common vision which they're pursuing in their lives. I want to conclude tonight by reading to you. I apologize for reading it to you. A thought or thoughts that when I was trying to define this came to me, and it came to me in a sort of poetic way, and I apologize for it. In fact, it's not poetry, but it has that sense sometimes, I know. The final vision of the Chumash is painful in its beauty. The pain stems perhaps from the failure to realize the vision in our time. Two solitary individuals confront one another. They act and are acted upon. They contend and are illuminated. They struggle, but the bond of their commitment sustains them. In their cooperation, in their complementarity, in their identification one through the other, they penetrate each other's existence. As a circle lying half within a square, each is itself, yet somehow altered. Through my partner's love of nature, I too come to love it. Yet he sees the ripples on the water, and I its currents. We have both grown together, but are not lost one within the other. To the contrary, we share the becoming of self through the medium of another, a relationship beyond gratitude. But this is not a static condition. The result can no longer be separated from the process. I am the other, she, I. We are together the dynamic of two lives, moving inextricably, one with the other, the hayu basar. Now I think if you think about it, you'll see that we have answered the question of what is Ezer Kenegdo. Okay, good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.